Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome to Breaking the Silence. Today, I have a special guest with me, and I'm so excited for you to hear her story. And Her name is Lesa Brackbill. She is the Director of Advocacy for the Leukodystrophy Newborn Screening Action Network. She is a mother of three, an author, a graduate student, and a newborn screening advocate. Lesa and her husband, Brennan, became involved with Krabbe related advocacy when their daughter Victoria was diagnosed with Krabbe disease in 2015. Using her knowledge and experience, Lesa helped to reform the newborn screening program in Pennsylvania, making the program stronger. And as a result of her efforts, Pennsylvania began screening for Krabbe in 2021. Lesa is the parent advocate for the LSD subcommittee of the Pennsylvania NBS Advisory Board and is also the co-chair of the Krabbe Stakeholders Group. Lesa and her husband reside in Hershey, Pennsylvania. I'm so excited to have her here, so let's jump into it. Breaking the Silence is a podcast that dives into the intricate and often challenging topics of grief and loss within relationships. Through insightful discussions, the podcast aims to explore how pain can be transformed into purpose, leading to healing and growth. By addressing themes such as inner child work and the journey towards feeling alive once more, this podcast offers a beacon of hope for those navigating difficult emotions. Ultimately, Breaking the Silence aims to guide listeners towards moving forward and embracing all the blessings that life has in store as they embark on a journey of self-discovery and spiritual fulfillment. I'm your guide through this journey, Renee Wallace, and I invite you to join me as we break the silence surrounding grief and loss, transforming pain into purpose and finding hope in the healing power of storytelling. Well, welcome to Breaking the Silence, and I am so excited that I have a special guest here with me today, and her name is Lesa. And I would love just, Lesa, for you to share. We met originally at Hunter's Hope, and you can just sort of share whatever you want, even about your story, your journey, even how we met at Hunter's Hope or whatever you want to share. I just want to hear about your little girl and all of it. So I'll let you sort of jump in and share.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I wish that we could have met under different circumstances. But as we often say in the leukodystrophy community, we've all been forced into a community that now we can't live without. But we would do anything to go back, and not have this community, because that would mean we'd still have our children. But I am grateful for you and for the other moms in the leukodystrophy community that have just come alongside us. And yeah, as we all walk this unwanted journey together. I entered the leukodystrophy community in 2015. My daughter, Tori, or Victoria, but we called her Tori, she had been a perfectly healthy child. And it was when she was 5 months old that everything changed. And it was truly like somebody had turned on a light switch and something is really wrong all of a sudden. And she stopped smiling, talking, eating, playing, you name it. And at first, being first-time parents, we thought maybe this is normal. We don't know. So maybe a week later, I took her to the pediatrician and he said, it seems like it's probably reflux. Like that seems like what's making her so miserable and why she has kind of regressed in some milestones. So we tried some meds, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I did not by any means think that we were going to lose our child. I didn't think anything like that, but I knew it wasn't just reflux. So we tried the meds. They didn't work. So at the end of January of 2015, she had her first CAT scan, because then the pediatrician thought maybe it's hydrocephalus. Maybe she's having really bad headaches, and that would explain all these symptoms as well. So we went straight to the ER, and the CAT scan revealed brain abnormalities. And of course, we were told this news on a Friday night. There were no specialists on duty at the hospital. And so we were forced to go home and wait until we could see the neurosurgeon on Tuesday. And I just couldn't believe it. So everything bad with Tori happened on a Friday. So it does make me wish that specialists worked more on weekends. But anyway, so we are grateful that it only took us a week after that to find out that she had a form of leukodystrophy. And then a week after that, we found out that it was Krabbe disease. So all of our diagnoses happened very, very quickly, which is not common in the rare disease world. So I was very grateful that our hospital, Hershey Medical Center, had actually seen 2 other cases of Krabbe disease in the 3 years prior to Tori being diagnosed. So the neurologist knew. She knew from looking at the MRI. And I will never forget that day. Friday, February 13th. So that was also fitting that it was Friday the 13th. She came in and she told us that it was Krabbe, that Tori only had about 2 years to live, and there was nothing we can do. In the last year, I've learned that I have a form of PTSD, and it's not surprising, honestly, I would be shocked if any of us didn't have a form of PTSD. It just took mine years to be triggered. But anyway, mine goes back to those words. There's nothing you can do. And the words that followed were when we were pleading with the neurologist, like, what do you mean? What do you mean there's nothing you could do?
Right.
And then she said, if you had caught it at birth, you could have treated it. So those words both caused some PTSD, but also made clear what I was supposed to do with the rest of my life. It was then that I began to learn about newborn screening. And, at that point I was very angry, because I'm like, what do you mean that there is a test that could have been done that would have given us options? Instead, we are left with this complete powerlessness. So I ended up launching that into what I still do today. But I didn't do that until Tori had passed away, because I knew she deserved my attention. But honestly, I just couldn't handle it. I'm sure you remember very well the grief that comes after diagnosis, the overwhelming grief. And we really struggled for about a month post-diagnosis. And then we made a decision. And it was not an easy decision. It's not one that I hope if people read my book, that they never think that I'm like, everybody can just decide that you're going to have a good time when your child is dying. No. For us, we knew it was good for us, and it was good for her to make memories and to live while she was here, to focus on living with her. We have no idea what she got out of the 50 bucket list adventures that we did. Absolutely no idea. Sometimes she was sleeping. It's hard to know what she got out of it, but we got memories. We had something to look forward to keep pushing us forward as we were, getting closer to her death. She did pass away at 20 months of age in March of 2016. And by then it was actually, as we always say, the day she died was not the worst day of our lives. And I know that sounds strange, but for us, diagnosis day was, because that's the day that we lost our future. We lost our dreams of raising a little girl. Brennan still has a really hard time at weddings during the father-daughter dances. And so I feel so bad that he will never get to have that experience. So there will always be parts of us that are reminded of what we have lost. But I'm so grateful that while she was living, we took every opportunity to live life with her. And now she lives on through my advocacy work, which is newborn screening.
So your story is so powerful. And I'm just going to say here, I have workers. Can you hear that really well?
No.
Good. Great. And it makes me think of so many things. I think that when you saying like diagnosis day was the hardest, I can relate to that. I mean, yes, absolutely. When you have to release your baby's physical body, like I think about when Bryant left the home that day and stuff and how hard that was. But I think that when you hear the diagnosis, and one word that you said that I remember saying even when I was recording Bryant's story is the powerlessness. Like realizing, like, as a mom, there's absolutely nothing I can do to make this better. Or as a parent, I shouldn't just say as a mom, but as a parent, there's nothing I can do to change this or fix it. And that's what we want for our kids, is to like protect them. And I realized I couldn't protect my kids from the grief of watching their brother pass, and um, also that I could do nothing about it. But you saying the diagnosis, it makes me think of that moment where you're just like grieving. Then you still have your baby, but you're grieving the whole entire future of what life was supposed to look like, right? And you talking about um, not having that first dance with the daughter at the wedding for your husband. And I thought about Bryant would never play ball with his dad. He would never experience that. I've watched my husband play ball with so many of our kids, throw football, baseball, whatever. And so you're grieving that throughout, right? Like you're dealing with dealing isn't the right word, but, walking through this diagnosis with them and managing all the changes that are happening so fast, and yet grieving everything you're losing along the way. And then, so it's like this ongoing grief that starts from the moment of diagnosis.
Yes.
So,
And I've actually learned there's two different words that can be attributed to that. One is anticipatory grief. So you're grieving what's to come, but then also ambiguous grief, which is the unknown. You don't know how long you have with your child. And I know for me, that's what I felt the heaviest. Every day, especially the 6 weeks leading up to her death, when she started having what is often called blue episodes, where her oxygen and her pulse would just drop. They would just plummet. So over and over again, having that, is it now kind of moment, like, are you dying now? Over and over again really takes a toll. And so it was just so ambiguous, the whole thing. I do wish that we had a little bit of an insight, when we were given this diagnosis. I mean, yes, they were accurate. Tori did not live to be 2. But, there are some kids with Krabbe disease that live longer. And I know with MLD, they do live longer typically than kids with Krabbe. And so it's just that unknown contributes to all the grief too.
Absolutely. I think that was part of even what I sort of held on to, was that once we had the diagnosis, seeing other MLD kids and even some Krabbe that were living much longer than what was projected. And so even for Bryant, they had said like 5 to 6 years was typical. So I was thinking we at least had that, if not maybe more, because I've seen some kids that had went further. So I was very shocked and was not at all I don't think you can prepare anyways. I remember our palliative nurse telling me, no matter how much we talk about this and we try to prepare you, nothing can truly prepare you for the moment that your child passes. But when he passed 11 months later, I was like, what do you mean? We were supposed to have more time, So it is still that very much wrestling with feeling very cheated. Like, you already know you're going to lose your baby, but I'm like, we didn't even, and I think a lot of us felt that way. Like my older son and stuff, like we didn't even get the time you guys told us we should have. So, and you talking about those moments, I talked about that in my podcast too, where in the last couple of days with Bryant, where that became very it was happening a lot. We knew he was passing then, like his organs were shutting down and everything.
Yeah.
And the moments of just he would stop breathing and his heart would stop, like his brain wasn't telling him to breathe, and then he would start up again. And exactly what you said, every moment of just thinking, is this it? And you're sort of holding your breath too. Like,
Absolutely.
is this the moment? And I think that you don't realize all the trauma that you are enduring through that process too.
Hey, absolutely. It took me 7 years.
Yeah. So
it wasn't until last year that our boys were going through a diagnostic process, nothing like Krabbe disease, but I was not handling it well. And I couldn't figure it out. And I kept giving myself pep talks like, get it together. This is not Krabbe. This is not a big deal. And I just couldn't help it. Like I didn't know. I didn't know that it was PTSD. But like I said, it makes so much sense looking back to all that I endured and you endured, all of us who have children with leukodystrophy. the things that we're forced to do, that we're forced to become a nurse, that we're forced to do these medical things to our children that are unnatural. And parents are not supposed to have to do that. Like, there's such a big difference between parenting and caregiving. And I never understood that until enduring all of this. But I still see the impacts of all of this on my memory. My working memory is not what it used to be. And so I have stopped fighting against my brain because I get frustrated with myself when I'm like, I can't remember, why I went in the next room. I can't remember what I'm supposed to do today. I rely on whiteboards and notes and all this. And I've decided to just acknowledge that this is my reality because of what I've endured, and it's okay. And so I've had to learn to give grace to myself and to others because it's so amazing the impact that things like this trauma have on our whole bodies, and we don't even know it.
Absolutely. I think, I guess I didn't realize it either. And sometimes when you tell your story, it's then in those moments where you almost, in a way, share it like sort of matter of factly, like you're almost telling somebody else's story, like this can't be my story. Like, and then when people are like, wow, like when they will maybe talk about the trauma you've been through, and you're thinking, oh, yeah, like you almost don't recognize it at first. It's just what you had to do, right? We just had to be thrown into being a nurse and a 24-hour caregiver to our, your daughter and my son, and you just do it. But then when you look back and you really start to, like, I think, process it and see, like, even what you're saying with your sons, and that triggering that. My son had a surgery a few months, well, it's been about 4 months ago now, on his shoulder. So nothing major, but walking into that hospital, and I walked through the surgery place, and right outside of one of the rooms was the whole team, how they'll gather, like the doctors and the nurses, and go over the case and everything before they go in and see the patient. That was happening, and it immediately took me back to Dave being in the hospital and the whole team being outside his door, meeting and going over everything. And same thing that you're saying, like you're giving yourself this whole like talk, like this is not the same thing. This is not, he's just having a simple surgery for his shoulder. And so you can quickly, I think, because of the past trauma, associate it with either your child being in the hospital or your spouse or whatever. So
yeah, I cried in speech therapy one day and I could not she didn't say anything wrong. And so all this, and I'm not a crier, and that's how I know that I'm being triggered. There's nothing wrong with crying. I'm not saying that. But I just personally have never really been someone who shows their emotions in that way.
Right.
So all of a sudden she says something in speech and tears start rolling down my face. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I had just learned that I had PTSD. And so I was like, something must have set me off. Well, what I've learned is that anything that even remotely sounds like diagnosis day, my brain mishears. So for instance, that day, all she had said is if your twins had started speech when they were 2, then they would be better off now. She didn't say anything wrong.
Right.
Well, my brain heard was if you had caught it at birth, you could have treated it. If you had caught it earlier, you could have done something about it. And so anything like that, I'm now obviously so much more aware of my triggers a year later. And so I'm doing better. But it's those little things that I'm like, what? She didn't even say anything wrong.
Right. Absolutely. But it just takes us immediately back to that point. And one thing I heard the other day that I think is absolutely true is, like, I started thinking about, I don't remember a lot of my childhood, and there was a lot of trauma in my childhood. And she was saying, like, that is very common to not remember your childhood if there's been a lot of trauma, because your body and your brain is just trying to keep you safe. So it disassociates, and the memories are still there, but they're stored in your body. I don't even know if you've heard of that book, The Body Keeps the Score. Those memories are there. They're just stored in your body, and basically your brain is protecting you from those memories. But it just made me realize, like, just how trauma really does affect us, and throughout our lives, until we recognize it and go back and then can work on healing those triggers that, activate those,
one of the things,
those memories.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
That's one of those things that as I continue with trying to find my find my place in this world. I jokingly have been going through a midlife crisis lately, trying to figure out what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm 3 weeks away from having a master's degree. What am I going to do with it exactly? And where can I have the most impact? And I want to stay in newborn screening and leukodystrophy, and there's no doubt about that. But I've just been trying to figure out which path to take. And now I absolutely cannot remember where I was going.
And that's where we have so much grace, right?
Oh my gosh. Anyway, I have been having this midlife crisis because there's so much work to do.
Real life here, right?
Oh my gosh. Yes. So mental health is something that is really ignored. So as I've been working toward the end of my master's project, I had to put out surveys into the world. And so I did a survey of the broader leukodystrophy community and then one of Krabbe disease families specifically, trying to learn what the unmet needs are, having my own suspicions. Sure enough, almost every respondent talked about the lack of mental health resources from licensed people. And so that is something that I and others are working on, trying to figure out how can we better serve these families who may not even recognize that they have lived through trauma, which it does sound kind of ridiculous. Every time I've told somebody, yeah, I think I have PTSD, they're like, of course you do. You lost your child. You lived through this whole thing. But like you said, I think our brains just kind of protect us from that. And my brain's like, no, you're fine. But something I've also had to recognize is that my upbringing in the Christian faith, I think also contributed to my denial of my PTSD, of depression, things like that. It's something that I've really been struggling with over the past year, just acknowledging that I had convinced myself that I was fine because I have faith.
Right.
And that's absolutely not true. And I know I'm not the only one. And so I really also want to see that be fixed. Just too many things to fix. But even if we are Christians, that does not mean we are immune from being impacted by the things that happen to us.
Absolutely.
And I had convinced myself that I was fine. So I'm really working toward all of that along with advancing newborn screening.
And I think that's huge to figure out. We can have, I think, our joy and our hope still in our faith, but also acknowledge what we've walked through and experienced and hold space for that and say, God gave us all these emotions. And for us to sort of sweep it under the rug, so to speak, and be like, no, I'm good because I'm a Christian and we have eternity in heaven. I mean, yes, I'm so thankful for that. I'm so thankful that we have the assurance that we will see our babies again, but it doesn't change what we experienced. And I think that even when we can acknowledge what other people are walking through and hold space for them, that is so huge. I was actually speaking to someone just last week, and this doesn't have, I mean, I was sharing some of Brian's story, but more, she had lost her husband 9 months ago. And so we connected and we're just talking. And she asked if she could know what happened with Dave. And so I told her, and again, like those moments where you think, like, it's not really that big a deal, is it? Like, she just held such space for, like, I cannot imagine the trauma you endured for 3 weeks of being in the hospital with him as he's on a ventilator. And I never really, I mean, yes, like I was like, yeah, there was moments that were very traumatic, like when they were trying to bring him off the medication and they thought they were going to be taking off the ventilator. But I realized, like, as she was talking, because her husband was in an accident and was on a ventilator just like overnight, I believe, like she had time to get there and be with them. And it was a very short amount of time. And she was like, that was even very traumatic for me. She was like, I can't imagine you living that for 3 weeks. And so again, it's that you don't even realize, you do what you have to do in the moment, right?
Yes.
And it can even be years later that you really stop and are like, wow, okay.
Absolutely.
That was a lot. So I would love to hear about the work you're doing now with newborn screenings and all that. Like, it's so important because, like you said, if we would have had a screening, it could have changed everything.
Everything. Yes. So 3 weeks after Tori died, I attended my first Pennsylvania Newborn Screening Advisory Board meeting. It just happened to be when it was. Was it wise for me to go 3 weeks after that? I don't know. but I thought, okay, I don't know what else to do. It was such a weird time after she died. And like you said, after they took her away, and it was like, okay, what do we do now? So I was like, okay, I'm just going to start learning. And I never would have imagined that this would be where I want to spend, at least as of now, the rest of my life in improving newborn screening and making sure that every child is screened for every possible treatable condition. So from what I learned at that meeting and through my research, I ended up spending 5 years trying to reform newborn screening here in Pennsylvania, because I realized that the problems were far greater than just that they weren't screening for Krabbe disease. Not all hospitals were screening for the same things here.
Okay.
I mean, so in the rare disease world, we talk about death by zip code, because what state you're born in determines life or death.
Right.
Well, in Pennsylvania, it was even worse, because it was what township or what hospital you happened to be born in. And so when I found that out, I thought, okay, we have to fix this. Sitting in all those advisory board meetings, I also was just amazed, because they're all so used to the way the system works. They needed fresh eyes, fresh ears to hear this and be like, excuse me? There were other issues too that we fixed, but it took me 3 attempts. I have a political science degree. I actually, when I moved to Pennsylvania from California, I worked for a lobbying firm for almost a year, and then decided I didn't want to do that because I couldn't have cared less about the subject matter. But I learned so much. I made connections. And so now looking back, I absolutely see why I had that job. So I thought for sure, okay, I know how to navigate this. I can get these bills through. I had no idea just how partisan Pennsylvania was. I come from California. It's very partisan, but I honestly feel like the legislature works more efficiently there than here. Anyway, all that to say, my first 2 bills died, and I later found out it was because the other party introduced them. So the minority party introduced the first 2 bills, and the majority party wouldn't even look at them. I can't tell you how much, I'm going to use the word deconstruction, like how much deconstructing I have done over the past 6, 7, 8 years. And it started at that moment, because I felt like my party, I'm now nonpartisan, by the way, because of all of this.
Okay.
I could not believe my party was betraying me in that way. They wouldn't even look at the bill. So I played their game. Our 3rd bill was introduced right before COVID. So you can imagine my frustration when the pandemic hit. I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. Not only is a pandemic scary and this is not good timing ever, we just introduced our bill and now basically the legislature has shut down. And so I felt like we're doomed. Well, thankfully we weren't, and we were able to still hold virtual meetings with stakeholders to discuss the language of the bill. And I'm so glad that we did, because we made it stronger. We removed the legislature from the process entirely for adding conditions in Pennsylvania, and it would not have happened without those meetings. So we found this amazing solution, and the bill was finally heard in committee in mid-September, and it went to the governor's desk 2 months later.
Wow.
I have never worked so hard in my life, and I had toddler twins. So that was exhausting, and I never want to do it again. But because of that, Pennsylvania can add conditions within 6 months. The advisory board has the power that they should. We are now in alignment with the Federal Recommended Uniform Screening Panel, or the RUSP, which is kind of the federal minimum standard for states. And we screen for Krabbe disease because of my advocacy. We did not add it legislatively. The advisory board chose to add it because I had been annoying them for so many years. I'm just kidding. It's because the science, they finally understood the science, and enough had been published in journals that they believed me. That is a hard part about being a parent advocate without letters behind your name,
Right.
because they're just like, who are you? So I had to learn that lesson the hard way too. But here's the best part of the story that still gives me chills today. So we began screening for Krabbe disease in May of 2021. On Tori's birthday, July 30th, so it's a little over 2 months after we started screening, we caught the first 2 babies with Krabbe disease.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, identical twins born on Tori's birthday. if we had not succeeded, those twins would have a completely different story. I haven't met them. I cannot wait to meet them and talk to their mom because I just couldn't believe it. And I felt like that was such like a redemptive moment, especially because they were born on her birthday. Since then, in our first 7 months of screening, we found 4 babies with Krabbe disease. We have found 5 altogether. But my work here was about more than Krabbe disease. Like I said, it was reforming the whole system, finding the problems that were going to prevent conditions like MLD from being added in the future. And we fixed it. And so I absolutely am so proud of the work that we all did. And yeah, so around that same time that I was doing all of this, an MLD mom who runs 2 MLD foundations, actually. Her name is Maria Kafalas. She runs Cure MLD and the Calliope Joy Foundation in memory of her daughter, Calliope, who had MLD. She contacted me in April of 2020 and she said, I have an idea and I want you to do it. And so she told me that she wanted to start encouraging leukodystrophy families to work together, for ALD, MLD, Krabbe, and then the other conditions that are going to be ready for newborn screening in the future, to work together instead of reinventing the wheel with every condition, learning from each other. Like, what do you know about how to do this in this state? And so she tasked me with doing this. And so unfortunately, but fortunately, she gave me so much autonomy that I had no idea what to do. So I just started a spreadsheet. I was like, well, I got to learn about all these states. My spreadsheet has actually become kind of infamous now, infamous, because it is so detailed, but it was how my brain could handle. I mean, there's 50 states plus DC.
Right.
It's so much information. And so I just decided to start doing that because I thought I need to equip parents in their states who want to do this. And that means I need to learn how to do it in every state. And so we started the Leukodystrophy Newborn Screening Action Network, which is a really long name. So we just say LDNBS.
Okay.
In 2020, and I am the director of advocacy. So we've been figuring it out as we go because this has never been done before.
Right.
But I have loved telling families stories like yours and giving them tools and education to be able to advocate for newborn screening when they are ready. We never expect anybody to advocate. And we were talking about how difficult it can be to tell our stories. So we try to take a trauma-informed approach and give families that control. You never have to go advocate. That's why we created these fact sheets. So you can just hand it out and you don't have to verbally tell your story over and over again because it can be re-traumatizing. And then last year I took that spreadsheet and this is actually the day I was procrastinating on grad school homework. 100%. I did not want to do homework, so I found this to do instead. But that's when I've done some of my best work, is when I'm procrastinating on something else. But I took all that spreadsheet because I thought, not everybody likes this, and this is not accessible to everybody. And so I created what I called the strategic plan or strategic analysis for both MLD and Krabbe disease. And I took it and I broke it down into categories of states. And I thought, I need to make this clearer. If you live in this state, this is what you can expect. This is what you can do. And we're actually going to be taking that a step further and making like one-pagers for each state. But that's been my goal because I have all of this knowledge about a really, really narrow field of newborn screening. And not everybody needs to know what I know about it. I don't want you to have to learn all about how your state does this. That's not your job. And so I have just loved it. I've loved it. I've loved getting to know people in the newborn screening arena and attend conferences and be part of the whole process because there is so much work to still be done.
That is incredible. And oh my goodness, how powerful that you had the first 2 diagnoses on Tori's birthday. Like that really, I mean, like you said, redemption in that and just a kiss from heaven of like, what everything you've done matters so much, That is huge.
It was huge. And every time I tell my story, like you said, it gets to the point where we almost disassociate, or I sometimes call it like an out-of-body experience. I can just tell what happened to Tori and remove the emotion from it when I need to.
Right.
And that probably is a protection thing for all of us. I don't know. But when it comes to telling about them I just get overwhelmed most of the time because I just can't believe it. And I also do know that they were the first two to enroll in the gene therapy clinical trial. And so they are the first two, and they're doing so well. I've seen videos with their faces blurred out, so I still don't even know what they look like, but them running around, like they're going to turn 3 this year.
Oh my God.
Running around being typical 3-year-old kids. Like it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And it's all because of Tori.
How beautiful. So the gene therapy, is that in Italy? Is that correct?
The one for MLD. The one for Krabbe disease is actually in Ohio.
Is it?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Florida is located in Columbus, Ohio.
Oh my goodness. I had no idea.
My favorite part about Forge, I wish we had more players in the Krabbe disease gene therapy space, but it's, drug development is exorbitantly expensive. And we had a couple of partners drop out because they couldn't afford it. But Forge has this brilliant business model where they manufacture gene therapy vectors, which I know is a term people probably don't understand, and that's okay. Just know that it's the part that carries the corrected gene to the patient. It's like a virus. Okay. Anyway, they manufacture the vectors for other companies. Their clinical trials are then funded by all of their manufacturing. So they will never have to stop a clinical trial just because they don't have enough money. And I'm so grateful because, as you know, in the rare disease space, only 5% of rare diseases have an approved treatment.
Right.
MLD is now one of those 5%. And so it just gives us hope.
Absolutely.
And I'm so grateful that they chose Krabbe disease to focus on and that the gene therapy seems to be working. There have been, I think, 5 children dosed so far. And the MLD one is a complete miracle. The kids that I have seen who have, like, there's teenagers now that had the gene therapy when they were infants, but the problem is their parents had to sacrifice a child to save another one because of the lack of newborn screening. And so this is going to be a huge year for MLD with newborn screening, and I can't wait. And I'm so glad I get to be part of it because of the hope, because of the gene therapy, because these parents are not going to have to lose children like all of us have just because their sibling ends up having it as well. So everything is going to change in the next 5-10 years.
It's incredible. And I think that is one of the things that you really have to wrestle with when your child does receive the diagnosis. Like you said, that if only they would have been tested. Like, you feel so cheated for them, for you, like for everything that it costs your family because there was a screening that could have totally changed the entire outcome. And just real quick, I would love for you to share, because you are way more knowledgeable, I feel like, than even I am with it. Like, and I try to explain it in simple terms of what like Krabbe is or MLD, for people that have never even heard it before. But I would love for you, I guess maybe we should have done that earlier, but it's fine. Just sort of to explain, I would love to hear how you explain Krabbe or MLD or leukodystrophy in general.
Sure. So leukodystrophies are diseases that affect the white matter and the myelin within the body. So leuko means white, dystrophy means dystrophy. Like, I can't remember what the actual definition is, but I feel like most people would understand because of like muscular dystrophy. Right. It's like a deterioration, I guess we could say that. Yeah. And so with Krabbe disease, the babies are born with a faulty gene. I mean, with any of these, but we're going to talk about Krabbe.
Okay.
They're born with a faulty gene, so their body does not produce enough of a specific enzyme. It's amazing how much each of these little enzymes our bodies produce matter. So in the case of Krabbe, it's an enzyme called galactocerebrosidase, which I actually know how to spell now, and that's a pretty big accomplishment with all these scientific words. So what what we call it is GAL-C, because it's much easier to write than galactocerebrosidase. But anyway, so GAL-C helps eliminate a toxin called psychosine in the body. Psychosine destroys myelin. So without enough GAL-C, the psychosine runs rampant. Right. And it destroys the white matter and the myelin. And right now, science has not quite figured out how to fix myelin. So this also would impact things like multiple sclerosis, ALS, any of those diseases that deal with myelin, once we can figure out how to get the body to produce it again, it's going to change the world. So I'm so glad there's so many different diseases working on the same thing.
Right.
So for Tori, her body was able, with the amount of GAL-C that was being produced, which was minuscule, was able to kind of fend off the cycosine until about 5 months old. And then it just couldn't do it anymore. And so that's when Krabbe set in and the cycosine took over. I do, as a side note, I do kind of love how sinister cycosine sounds, because it is a sinister little toxin.
Right.
But basically that's what it does. So it not only destroys the brain, it destroys the nervous system throughout the body. MLD is similar. There's elevated sulfatides that come from that faulty gene, and that's what ends up doing the same thing. But MLD, I feel like, is even more tragic, truly, because I know, like, we just went to a 21st birthday party for an MLD boy this weekend. He was able to receive a bone marrow transplant, but he was post-symptomatic.
Right.
And so it has really impacted his life, but he just turned 21.
Okay.
And he was 5 when he became symptomatic.
Wow.
Cool. And I just can't imagine that. Like, it was bad enough having Tori not ever gain milestones, and not, like, we never heard her say mama or dada. We know. So it was hard enough with all the things we never saw. But for stories like the Serenos and like yours, where your child has milestones,
Right.
and then they lose it all, it just breaks my heart. Like, being in this space, one of the things that I've recognized recently, not that it's ever okay, and I haven't quite figured out how to articulate this, but I think you'll understand. We live in a space where it's normal for children to die. It's normal. It is just the reality. And I cannot wait for this reality to change. I cannot wait. And that's what keeps me going, because it's not okay. But right now it is our normal.
And I do think sometimes it's hard to even look at it, because you see these kids dying, and of course you heal, but it also takes you back to that. And it's so hard to just watch these sweet kids that we grow to love. Yes, pass. And I was at an MLD conference, and one thing they explained that really helped me even understand it, the sulfatides, it's like you said, it's like building up in the system, and their body can tolerate it for so long. And that's where you don't really notice it, or the changes are so gradual at first. Like, I seen that Bryant wasn't hitting milestones the way he should, but he had also, in his situation, because we adopted him, he had been exposed to drugs. So we associated a lot of the changes, or not hitting milestones, I should say, with just, okay, well, he was drug exposed. Maybe that's why he's having some delays. But yes, like you said, it is very hard to watch them lose their abilities, to be able to say, I love you, and say your name, and all those things, and watch or play on the floor with their brothers with cars, and how scary more, even it made me think how scary that has to be for him. Because even as adults, think of if we were trapped in our bodies and couldn't speak, or couldn't move, wanted our bodies to do things and they wouldn't, we would be terrified. And here's this 2.5-year-old little boy that's what broke my heart. Like, he has to be so scared. Like, what is going on,
Right.
But the sulfatide, is that right?
Sulfatides, yeah.
How they explained it was like it keeps building up, like you have this cup or whatever, and it just keeps raising, and finally it just starts to spill over, and the body can just no longer, and that's where you really start to see it. So that helped me to like that, and even like with the melanin, like a coating over of like a phone cord or something.
Yes.
Like how
it's like whatever covers an electric wire too.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like there's a break in the disconnect, and so the signals aren't getting through. So is there anything else that you would like to share? I'm so thankful for your story and all the work you're doing. It is incredible how you've poured so much into all this with raising twins. That is amazing.
Yeah. Like you said, we just kind of go through life, and then we look back and we're like, wow, that was a lot. I don't know why I started graduate school when they were 3. I don't know. Actually, maybe they were 4, but either way, yeah, it's been a lot, but everything that I've done has been to make me a more effective advocate and to be more effective at equipping other parents. Because this is not about me. This is not about Tori. This is about all of us collectively doing something because we couldn't do something, if that makes sense. Like,
Absolutely.
this is how what I always say is that advocacy is how I continue to be Tori's mom.
Mm.
Because otherwise, to most people, it's like she didn't exist. There are people that I meet today that never met her, that didn't know.
Absolutely.
And that's also a weird thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of my little side jobs, I oversee a whole bunch of high schoolers and college students. And I'm like, this is so strange that they think I am just here to be the manager on duty. And they have absolutely no idea
Right.
that I have lost a child and that I am doing all of these things. And it's not about me. It's just so interesting how there are people that will never know what we endured.
Absolutely.
They only see what has come after that. And so I'm trying to make sure that what comes after that is a good legacy for Tori and for my boys, of course. They are about to turn 6. They do not even carry Krabbe disease. I'm so grateful for the technology that IVF is.
Absolutely.
Because without that, we wouldn't have more children because the risk was just too great.
Right.
So I'm so grateful that we have broken the chain of Krabbe disease in our family. And
Beautiful.
if they choose to have children someday, they won't have to worry about it. But newborn screening matters. And I guess the last thing I would say is, I know it's so easy to be angry when you think about like, there's a test. Why can't everybody just do it? But one of the things I've learned over the last 8 years is that newborn screening is not just a test, it's a system. It's a very complex public health system. There are so many moving parts, and it is not because of a lack of passion or desire to screen for these conditions that they aren't being screened.
Okay.
There's just so much that goes into all of it, but that's why I have learned to navigate it so that I can help make this better.
That's incredible. Do you know how many states now have even the newborn screening for Krabbe by any chance?
Oh, of course. Yes, 12.
Of course you do, right?
Of course I do. 12 states screen for Krabbe. Minnesota is the most recent to add it. And that was just in the end of February. I think February 24th is when they started screening.
Okay.
A month in, they found their first baby with Krabbe disease.
Wow.
The mom reached out to me last week and told me all about it. And they are looking forward to the gene therapy clinical trial. And I just couldn't believe it. Yet again, that timing. If Minnesota had waited until the fall to implement like they thought they were going to have to wait, this baby would not have a chance at life. So I look forward to more states adding Krabbe disease in the next 4 years. And of course, MLD.
And so I have to ask, of course, because MLD is what affected us. How many states have it for MLD now? Are there any yet, or
none? However, Illinois and Tennessee are expected to implement this year.
Really?
And it is also our hope that Pennsylvania will be one of the first because I fixed it here. But according to all of my data and conversations that I've had, it is very likely we could see MLD added to the federal RUSP, the Federal Recommended Uniform Screening Panel, in late 2025, which means that by 28, 29, we should have most states screening for it. I know that sounds like a long time, but in some cases, like with ALD, it has taken more than 10 years for states to add it. But thankfully, because of the work of advocates that even have gone before me, with making states add these conditions that are added to the federal panel, we are going to have a much easier path with MLD. So I'm very, very excited about what's to come.
Yes, that is so exciting. I appreciate you joining me today. Like, thank you so much for sharing Tori's story, your story, and the work you're doing. It is huge in saving babies' lives. And that, is just so beautiful and really just incredible. I mean, when you talk about like what we went through and then now being on this side of it, I think it just shows the beauty of God, even in the redemption, and that when we felt so powerless in the beginning, we can use all this for something so beautiful after the fact, And so the other families will maybe never have to know what we knew.
Right. That's the goal.
Yeah,
They will never
absolutely.
need to have tons of support groups and all of this. I mean, if they want them, that's fine. But yeah, our
Right.
goal is for the landscape to completely change because
Absolutely.
that's the right thing to do. And I always say that I know this was supposed to be my story. Because when I look back, like I mentioned, my education, my lobbying experience,
Right.
even just my love of spreadsheets, like I would have never guessed when I graduated from college in 2005 that I would be in the newborn screening space because I didn't even know what newborn screening was. Most people don't know what it is.
Right.
But when I look back, God's hand over all of that is evident. This was always supposed to be my story. As much as I wish I could change it, I'm gonna roll with it.
And I think that is absolutely it. When I was even talking with the lady that her husband passed and we were talking about our stories and stuff, yes, it doesn't mean that we really wish that it wasn't the story we had. Of
Yeah.
course, like I would give anything for it to be different. But I also see God's hand through it all and that
Yeah.
He gave us this story for a reason. And so I think that is where you can say there has to be purpose in the pain and to use it to make a difference. So
Yeah, absolutely.
thank you so much. I am so thankful that you joined me today, and it was so good to talk with you.
Yes, thank you so much for letting me share.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Breaking the Silence. As we conclude our time together, let us carry forward the stories we've heard, the emotions we've shared, and the connections we've forged. Remember, the journey through grief and loss is not one we walk alone. In the silence, we find solidarity. In our shared experiences, we find strength. And in our vulnerability, we find resilience. If you or someone you know is navigating the complexities of grief, know that there is support available. Reach out, lean on your community, and remember that healing is not linear. It's a journey, and you are not alone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for being a part of this community. Until next time, may you find peace in the spaces between the silence. Please be sure to subscribe below and leave us a review. If you'd like to connect further, you can find me on Instagram at Coaching with Renee.